welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Startup Junkies podcast. Thank you for tuning in from wherever or however you are joining us today. My name is Caleb. I'm joined by my co-host, Victoria. How's it going, Victoria?
Good. Glad to be here.
Happy Friday. And we are very pleased to be joined today by Tim Swindle. He is the co-founder of Glacier Games, which has a super cool new outdoor rec product that I'm going to let him talk about. But Tim, we really appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
All the way from Nashville. So Tim, tell us kind of the genesis. Well, actually give us your origin story. I just looked at your LinkedIn, saw that you are a serial entrepreneur. And you got a background in that. So I'm curious kind of your origin story and then kind of the genesis of Glacier Games.
Yeah, so I was originally a software entrepreneur. I was building a sales software company with some guys I went to college with. And while doing that, had a idea for kind of a passion project. Just wanted to have like a side hustle to kind of scratch an itch I had to create a physical board game. And so when I say I create games, most people usually think digital, but no, these are tangible physical games that I create. And so that was kind of on a whim that I did that kind of on nights and weekends. And it was a very different style too, right? So the software company, we were venture backed, raised a bunch of capital, running big teams, burning a ton of cash, very stressful environment. And then this was like this just fun kind of creative project on the side that I bootstrapped with another friend. And so anyway, put that out in the world, did a Kickstarter campaign, had no idea what I was doing, by the way, just was like tons of Google searching on how to create games and whatnot. But anyway, we got it out to the world. We did a Kickstarter campaign and didn't blow up like you see some of these do on Kickstarter where they get millions of dollars. Ours like, I don't know, barely hit like 16 grand, but it was our first win and we were officially launched. And it was through that I was introduced to my now business partner, Scott Brown. Scott had started a series of retail stores. So kind of focused on the like brain health was like it was called Marbles the Brain Store. And it was their kind of niche was brain health. And it was mostly toys and games that would improve your brain health was kind of the shtick. So anyway, met Scott through that. He ended up being the first retailer to carry my game. My game, by the way, was called Utter Nonsense. Just like a silly, funny game where you'd say, you speak in silly voices or like accents. So an accent could be like British. And then you have to say something funny that was on your card. So stupid drinking game, but people seem to love it and ended up getting it into like Target and Walmart and some other bigger companies, bigger retailers, and ultimately was acquired by a kind of a private equity backed toy and game company. So that was my first foray into the toy and game space. Scott and I kind of hit it off while I was a vendor of his. He continued on to build that business to about 40 different locations around the country, and ultimately was acquired by a big Canadian toy and game company called Spin Master that's publicly traded. So through that, we just got to be buddies and had always wanted to kind of work together, and decided to pursue this next thing, which is Glacier Games is kind of like the LLC, but it's actually called PaddleSmash. I'm gonna pause for a second. That's the background. And now we're doing PaddleSmash is the next kind of endeavor. But let me just take a breath and see if I have any questions there.
Yeah, absolutely. So PaddleSmash, and looking at it, it looks kind of like a combination of like some, I think I read pickleball and some other things, and I've never played pickleball, full disclosure, but I have heard a lot about it, and I know that it is like increasingly popular. So just kind of tell us a little bit about the game itself and like how you developed that and kind of rode that maybe that wave of increasing popularity of some overlapping sports.
Yeah, exactly. So PaddleSmash, we like to say it's kind of like the love child of pickleball and spikeball. So pickleball as you kind of referenced, it's exploding. It's the fastest growing sport in America right now. You saw last week, Tom Brady announced that he's buying a team. The week before that, LeBron's buying a team.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, it's growing like crazy. And then Spikeball is another really popular game. It's probably the most popular backyard game for the past 10 or so years. So it's a mix between those two. It's played with paddles and a pickleball, but it's kind of the same circular surface that you can bring to the beach, play in the backyard. That is like Spikeball. So it's played on a hard surface with like a net that goes around it. So trying to give people a visual, but it's easy. When you see it, you're kind of like, got it. So anyway, that is the game. We just launched it a couple of weeks ago, and the background story there is kind of interesting. So, Scott and I do actually create most of the stuff that we come up with. But in this particular instance, we were actually introduced to a gentleman who lives in Utah, and he's got 7 children, and 6 of them are boys. And he is an engineer, like a structural engineer by trade. And his family loves playing pickleball. And the problem is, like a lot of people right now, pickleball courts are always crowded. In some cases, while it's incredibly popular, they're not everywhere. And so for his instance, pickleball courts are like 20 minutes away. And so he's just like, God, like, how can we do this like in our backyard? And it's not like something he could, like 40 grand to put a pickleball court in your backyard, or you don't have the space, so that's not realistic. And so just being an engineer, he was, and his family used to love playing Spikeball. They've kind of outgrown it. He's also a little bit older, can't really keep up with the younger kids with that game. And so anyway, just being a tinkerer, he started putting some ideas together, bought a bunch of materials, bought big plastic sheets, bought some netting, and kind of Frankensteined this concept together of what has now become PaddleSmash. And he played it. He ended up like making a really nice prototype eventually, played it with like their local family, friends, neighbors, whatever, had a ton of fun with it, but didn't know how to commercialize it. That just wasn't his skill set. He's not an entrepreneur. And my business partner, Scott, he happens to live in Utah, and through just kind of a random connection, was introduced to Joe. Joe's the inventor. And the funny little side note is that literally like a week before, Scott and I had been doing like a brainstorm session on new ideas, and we literally sketched up what Joe had created. Like, I have this still
That's crazy.
on my desk. Yeah, it's wild, because we knew pickleball, like Scott's a huge pickleball player. So we were just like, God, like what can we do in that space? Like, backyard games are exploding right now. That's like in all of games, like backyard games are kind of like the fastest growing genre, if you will. And so, yeah, so we were like, well, so when we saw it, it was just like, that's it, like that's it. And Joe had done the heavy lifting of creating the prototype and like working out certain kinks and the sizing and all the stuff that, it takes a long time to figure out. And so we licensed it from him in this instance. So we worked out a licensing deal, and we are the ones, bringing it to market. We're publishing it, if you will. And yeah, so that's the background on PaddleSmash.
Awesome. I'm super curious, having the background that you have in kind of more of a tech field, and you mentioned some of the differences early on when you were talking about getting into the outdoor sport type startup scene. Kind of walk us through like how different or how similar those two just arenas are.
Sure. So, I mean, software, you generally need bigger teams. It just requires more people. And with that are big salaries generally. And so you need capital. And so if you don't have that yourself, you have to go raise it. So fundraising is a whole beast on its own. So it's very time consuming. And then you also give up control, you give up equity, you give up, I don't know, you give up a lot. And then you give up your time also, because you're also then having to deal with investors who want to talk and see how things are going. And you're managing people. So I'll just like come out and say that I don't love managing people. I feel like it's more I don't know. That's just not what I want to do with my time.
Mhm.
I think that's like a very time consuming things to manage people. And so that's what I was doing. And so, yeah, it's those things. It's like you're raising money. You're also burning a lot of money. Like you're not actually, even if you have revenue, you're likely spending a lot more than you're making, particularly for an early stage startup. And it's just a very stressful environment, and then like I was saying, like on the side, I had this just like silly, stupid idea for a drinking game. And it had very little capital requirements up front. In this particular case, it was a box of cards. So could manufacture it domestically, didn't have to go, to China or wherever to manufacture it. Could do small order quantities also. So that's like one takeaway I would say, like, if you've got ideas, like pick the one that's like the lowest cost to entry, to kind of like test it out. If you've got some big, heavy, very, there's like a big, hairy, audacious goals. Maybe that's one where you like look to license it or something to start out, like Scott and I both will license ideas. Like if we're not the right fit for doing it, if it requires like in the game space, particularly, like you have to do some like expensive custom molding, like injection molds that just whatever, they're expensive. That's a big commitment up front. And so anyway, so the differences are then you're like very low tech with games, obviously. But I think there's something about that right now. There's like a resurgence to being low tech right now, because I think especially with parents with kids, like they want to pull them out of screens. People spend so much time on their computer, on their laptops, iPads, iPhones, whatever. And so you're seeing like games, physical board games and outdoor games becoming super popular. And I think it's because, like we've gotten so digital with society that, it's given this opportunity to just like get back to actually interacting with each other. And I'll say like, that's part of the reason why I love it also. So like we talked a little bit just now about like the business side of things, but like, just, I don't know, waking up every day, feeling good about what I'm doing too. Like making business software just isn't that exciting to me. Whereas like making games that people play with to have fun in their life, that's really rewarding, as cheesy as it sounds, like even if it's not financially successful if I launch one that doesn't do well, like I probably had fun creating it. So it's not a waste of my time, in my opinion. And then, like, I think regardless, like people enjoyed it and enjoyed each other. And I don't know, I'm like trying to bring fun to the world. It's like, as dumb as that sounds, like that truly is like what I like doing, is bringing fun to the world. A lot of crap going on. I don't know if you've been following the news, a lot of not good
been
stuff
alive
going
with
on.
your eyes open. Yeah.
So I'm trying to balance that out.
That's awesome.
And I'm going to say this because I'll forget it if I don't. I listened to a podcast, I think it was an NPR podcast not too long ago, and it was they were talking about kind of the science of fun, and then fun as a necessity, like even in adults, and just kind of comparing health outcomes for individuals that don't have any fun in their life, and just like the just general necessity of fun. And so it's not a novel idea to promote fun. It's not immature or
right
juvenile. It's like that's a vital part of our chemistry that we know, of course.
Continue to have fun as we get older and have more responsibilities, and I believe it. I get it. So I'm trying to live it.
That's awesome. I definitely see, I think everyone has seen with the pandemic and the long-term effects that we're seeing happen, the mental health crisis that was not new before the pandemic, but just amplified it, and how people are realizing that fun is essential, and that it's also not easy to bring into your life. It takes work. And so, it takes intention to bring fun into your day-to-day. And, the benefits of that is that we see that you're more creative, that you're happier, your mental health goes up, all of these things. And so I love what you're doing, creating fun in a world that's such a fun job.
Thanks.
Just by nature.
It's also sorry, I was just going to add to what you were saying there. It's like the other aspect of it is like being human with other humans. I think like we also like need that more in our life, because we've become so digitally native, right? Like I work remotely, like I don't go in an office. And I think there's something about just like interacting with each other that is really healthy, along the same lines of like fun is healthy. I
Yeah,
think, it's good to just like be with people. And I don't know, I think we need that as human beings. So that's the other benefit, is typically you're playing games with other people and
absolutely.
enjoying each other's company.
Human connection and
Mm-hmm.
the benefits you might not see on paper necessarily, but you feel it person to person, just building those relationships.
Yeah.
And so as far as, you said that starting out with utter nonsense, that you were, just Googling was your very first time figuring out how to do this kind of from the ground up. I think a lot of our listeners are in that stage or have been in that stage. What
Mm-hmm.
was something that worked for you when you were just figuring it out that you maybe didn't expect to, just a random article that you read that ended up paying dividends, or something that you wasted a lot of time doing, wouldn't do again? Like when you were in that Googling, figuring it out from the very beginning stage, what were your takeaways from that?
Yeah. So with that, there's a couple stories I could share. So one thing we did was, my sister at the time was not working and she just had a kid. And I was like, hey, I could use some help doing some PR outreach. And she had never done that before, but we just kind of talked through what the process would be like. I'm like, just go find some people that would be interested in our story, people that cover games, and reach out to them. So she did that. She reached out to a bunch of them, and we ended up getting published in one that was in Toy and Game News UK. And I was like, cool, but our game's not sold in the UK. So like, great, but like, thanks, not super happy about that one. Well, turns out the target buyer does read Toy and Game News UK. So that led to a series of insane conversations that I will, till this day, I'll never replicate what happened here. But it was like basically a month after launch, this article came out. Shortly after that, we were contacted by Target. And then that led to us being in all Targets nationwide the next spring. So it was
Wow.
like, we like launched in, I don't know, like October. They reached out in November. And then in like March, we were like in every Target in America. It was
That's
insane.
crazy.
But so that would be just like one example of like, I didn't know what was going to work. Like I talk a lot about, you have to like increase your surface area of luck. And that would be an example where it was just like, hey, like just be reaching out to people that think would be interested in this. Again, like got published in something that I thought was nothing, thought was a waste of time. And here it led to kind of a life-changing moment of, getting picked up in Target. So that would be that's one example. And I'll tell like a funny story from that. So like when they reached out, we were actually, sorry, let me take one step back. The reason I even decided to pursue that was I read an article in Inc. magazine that covered the Cards Against Humanity story. So again, like incredibly popular party game. And they were some kids from Chicago that were younger than me, and that's where I was from. So it just seemed like very like tangible and real to do something like that. And this article basically like laid out the blueprint for what they did, kind of like talk through, whatever their process. Like they worked with this card manufacturer, they launched a Kickstarter campaign, they like, had a website on what, I don't know, just kind of like laid out the blueprint. And that just gave me the confidence to be like, all right, well, I'm going to follow that blueprint to like do my thing. So I don't know the point of that, me telling you that, but like, that was just like another like learning at the time and reading something that just kind of gave me the confidence to move forward. But anyway, the story I want to tell was the conversation with Target, because the Googling stuff was like the question. So like, I'll never forget being on these calls with Target. So I've never sold anything in retail in my entire life, barely knew how to create a card game at this time. And we're having these conversations with professional buyers at the largest retailer in the country, or Walmart. Target's big though.
Yeah.
And they're throwing out all of these retail terms that I had no clue what any of them meant, like end caps, and can't remember what they were, but I'm Googling as we're talking, like, what's an end cap? And so I don't know, like ultimately, like kind of learned what those terms meant, learned that they were good things for the most part, because we were really nervous about working with them because we had heard horror stories of working with big retailers. Like if the game goes in and doesn't sell, you have to buy it back. So there's like there's a term for that. And so they were very receptive to the concerns, and they would be like, well, here's how we can help you sell within our stores. We're going to give you like end caps. We're going to put you like in the wheel, which is like their like discount thing. And so that led to us getting comfortable enough to say yes. And so, but yeah, but it was a lot of Googling, searching, because I didn't know anything. And so I had to like look up every single term you could possibly imagine and try to learn how to do business with retailers.
That's great. Google University is a real real thing. And I think everybody's been there at some point, and it legitimately helps. You know, it's a free resource that people take advantage of. And I think we'd all be surprised by the number of big names out there that attended Google University.
Right.
Keep up to date on the latest news in economic development with the Arkansas Economic Development Commission's Arkansas Inc. newsletter. Each month, get the Arkansas Inc. newsletter, which spotlights the latest project wins and developments throughout the state, delivered to your email. The newsletter features major project announcements, company expansions and relocations, news articles, rankings, and more that highlight why Arkansas is a great state to do business. The newsletter is a snapshot of what AEDC has been working on and what we are following. The quarterly Tech Trends newsletter highlights the latest news in Arkansas's growing tech sector. You can learn about new Arkansas tech companies, computer science and cybersecurity initiatives, funding and venture capital announcements, and even more. AEDC offers 4 quarterly newsletters: the Food and Beverage Industry Digest, Aerospace and Defense Beacon, Timber Trends, and Tech Trends. To learn more or sign up for a newsletter, visit arkansasedc.com/news.
I think there's some really valuable nuggets in both of those stories. You said increasing your surface area, and I think it's important for entrepreneurs to increase their surface area to others too, and just keeping connections and, like, you know, being willing and personable and engaging with those around, because we see so many entrepreneurs come through the door at Startup Junkie by nature of the consulting that we do. And one thing that I'm always impressed by, if somebody's doing something similar, you know, most of the people we work with are willing to have those conversations with, you know, the next entrepreneur who's trying to do something similar, and it creates this collaborative nature. And, like, you know, you wouldn't have that sense of I guess camaraderie, but also just the mentorship that comes with, you know, expanding that willingness and that surface area of and people call it networking, but just like relationship building. And two, you talked about the guys who created Cards for Humanity, and you kind of could see if they could do it, you could do it, kind of sense of thing. And that's kind of what we do with our events too. It's kind of like a moniker of what we do. If you can see it, you can be it. And like the importance of kind of putting forward entrepreneurs that have done something awesome and have overcome this, or, you know, beaten that challenge and have done it. I think it's important for other entrepreneurs to see that as well.
Yeah, totally agree. And the one thing I would maybe just add, like when you're talking about entrepreneurs wanting to be entrepreneurs, one thing I see is like a lot of them are closed off with their ideas, and they think somebody's going to steal their idea. They want to like sign an NDA. They want to talk to people about it. I think that's the exact opposite approach you should take. Nobody cares about your idea like you do. Nobody's going to rip it off. And you should be out there talking to people, sharing your idea, trying to get feedback, because before you ever spend $1, you can get a pretty good feel for if you're onto something, just by talking to people. And so that would be my like biggest piece of advice to entrepreneurs is like, go out there, share your idea, talk to people. Don't worry about anybody stealing it. That's not going to happen. And get the real raw feedback as to whether or not you have something. It's going to convince you to move forward.
there are so few original ideas, and 99% of I think a startup or a small business or anything like that is execution.
Execution. That's all it is.
Yep.
That's all it is.
And I would be curious to hear you speak to, you talked about Kickstarter, and we get clients sometimes that'll, that have that assume, you just put something on Kickstarter, click go live, and then they're going to, have $1 million tomorrow and they're going to have their product out the door next week. When in reality, there's so much like actual groundwork and foundation laying that you have to do to have a successful Kickstarter campaign. What were some of the takeaways that you would, tell us about from that experience?
So to be totally fair, I'm not one of the ones that figured out the recipe, and I've done a couple now, and I've each time barely hit the goal. And so I know what the people that do well, like what they're doing, and they are pre-marketing the heck out of it. So a lot of people think it's like the Kickstarter is where you start. And a lot of times it's like these people have gathered a lot of interest and email addresses and really kind of built a community prior to launching. And then they kind of engage that community once they go live. And that's how they come out of the gate hot, because then that starts to kick in the algorithm at Kickstarter to say you're trending, and then you start to show up everywhere. So that would be the biggest thing, is really focus on pre-marketing and building up a community before you ever go live. That's it. You need to bring your own community versus expecting the Kickstarter community to back you first. Because it's a big time momentum play on Kickstarter. People like to back winners. And so if you go on there and they see that you're kind of stuck, you're not hitting your goal, they're like, I'm not gonna back this thing, it's never gonna hit, right? Whereas if one comes out of the gate hot, it's funded early, it's you just get the hype machine going. So that's one of the biggest lessons I would say, is that you got to bring your own audience and bring your own community before you tap into the Kickstarter community.
And get them excited about what you're doing before you ever launch that. And I think it helps too to have a physical product that they're going to get once they back that. They're not just, getting their name on a website or
yeah, that's a whole nother thing, is just the types of products that you see do well. There's just certain niches that do really well on Kickstarter. And so that's another thing, would be make sure that yours fits the Kickstarter community, because there does seem to be a specific niche on Kickstarter.
It's all about human connection.
There we go.
That's what it keeps coming back to. That's what I see time and time again, the people that show up to not just our events, but events in general, physically going and making those connections. I mean, it only builds those relationships. And then, that's the pre-marketing to your Kickstart campaign, or having these connections that you might meet someone who knows someone who knows someone that can get you where you need to be. And so just showing up and having that real human connection, maybe over a game of pickleball or PaddleSmash is where that happens. But that's what it's all about. So I'm just curious how, on this topic of human connection, face-to-face is great, but as we all know, that's not necessarily possible every single day, or it limits your reach. So how do you utilize social media in promoting your personal products, your games, in marketing? Do you use influencer marketing? I mean, what does the social media strategy look like for you guys?
So we are in the works of trying to figure that out. We are doing social media advertising. So we are working with an agency that's helping us out with that, focusing on Instagram and Facebook to start. But we also, our first hire was a social media manager. And so she is just getting going right now. But the platforms that we're working on are Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, mostly for educational content, and then TikTok. So, TikTok is the platform du jour, if you will. And,
it is, yeah.
Everyone seems to be trying to crack that one, and we're no different. The beauty of games in general, but in particular this game, is that it's a very visual product, and it looks like just fun to watch. So in terms of like content for social media, we know that it works really well just to show people playing the game. So like when we first got going with this, when we took some video of ourselves playing it with the prototype, when we were trying to garner interest and show it to people, like we just physically showed the video we had on our phones, and it was just like, got it immediately. So yeah, so we are, going to be actively pursuing and involved in, we think social media will be a big channel for us. Did I answer your question there?
Yeah, absolutely.
I was like, what we're doing specifically. Oh yeah, influencers. Okay, so we just installed on our website a app called Social Snowball. And what this is really cool is because like with games, word of mouth is kind of this inherent, there's like an inherent viral coefficient with games, right? Because you can't play games by yourself. So you're like taking a game to a party, to a beach or backyard barbecue, whatever, and you're sharing with people. And so the beauty of that is like, then like, how can we enhance that? And how can we like encourage people to share it with their friends and convince people to buy it? So when you purchase, you like automatically get signed up for like a referral code. And like, if you give that to people, like they get $20 off. And if they use it, like you get $20. So, and it's like all seamless as you check out, whatever. So we're trying to just like stoke that word of mouth fire early on with some of our early adopters to get them to like share it. So.
Gotcha. That's great. You're right. I never really thought that games by nature are word of mouth. I mean, you invite people in that it's your game, but a lot of games you don't just play by yourself. So that's very true. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, one of the kind of the land the plane question as we kind of wrap up the podcast is we invite our entrepreneurs to go in their time machine and go back, years before, however many years before you, even co-founded your first software company, or, further than that, even if you want to. And if you could give your younger self advice, what advice might you give yourself?
So I don't have a lot of I have a lot of self-doubt. Just especially when I was younger, didn't think I had the chops to like make it on my own or to be an entrepreneur. So I would just say, for me, it would be like, just trust yourself, trust in yourself, and like just work your ass off, and you'll get it done. And so it would just be like, yeah, like just basically trust yourself, and you've got what it takes. So get going.
That's great.
So where can our listeners find out more about you, find out more about PaddleSmash and everything you're doing? Where can they plug in on that?
Yeah, so I think PaddleSmash.com is the easiest place for that. And we're on our website, PaddleSmash.com. We've got Amazon listing as well. We're also going to be in Dick's and Shields and some other big retailers here shortly. So, but yeah, I mean, PaddleSmash.com would be the easiest. And then, yeah, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn, I would say, is probably, if you're looking for me specifically, I'm on LinkedIn, Tim Swindle.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to share your story with us and our listeners, and wish you the best of luck. And we'll have to have you back on when you have launched the next product or startup.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Take care.
Thanks, Tim.
Ecosystem builders, entrepreneurs, chambers of commerce, mayors. If you're interested in taking your economic future into your own hands, we've got a book that can help you. Creating Startup Junkies, Building Sustainable Venture Ecosystems in Unexpected Places is the guide. It's a little bit inspiration. It's a little bit toolkit. What it will allow you to do is take your economic future into your own hands and build a sustainable small business, innovation, and entrepreneurial ecosystem in your backyard. If you'd like to hear more, check out creatingstartupjunkies.com. The Startup Junkie podcast reaches over 100 countries and has had over 100,000 downloads. If you're interested in reaching some of the most motivated and engaged innovators and entrepreneurs on a worldwide basis, give us a shout.